The following video contains image and footage from certain anime that isn't suitable for kids to watch. Viewer discretion is advised.
Trust me, do not make the mistake of playing the original trilogy rather than the Rebirth trilogy first. The first game had to be retconned because everything but its story and concept were horrible.
Side note, by the way, pretty much all of the originals and remakes are still worth playing, with the exception of a couple of them. We don't really talk about those ones.
There's a few reasons I don't recommend starting with the earlier PS3 games, Hyperdimension Neptunia, Neptunia Mark II, and Neptunia Victory. Those games are no longer canon. I think having this game be the introduction of the series could potentially scare off someone who'd otherwise be a fan.
So the first three titles are no longer canon to the franchise? In other words, don't touch them.
Well, looks like it's time to prove some people wrong here. Now, I've watched my fair share of anime being based off of games from their franchises, from Pre-Power to Show by Rock, to Senran Kagura, to Supersonico, to Sonic X, etc, etc. But this one in particular is quite the interesting franchise, I tell you, and that is the Neptunia franchise. Now, some of you might be thinking that this series is all just fan service, and I wouldn't blame you there. It has a fair share of fan service, from panty shots to angles to breast bounces, even imaged cutscenes with bouncy physics. Senran Kagura also has a shit ton of fan service in their games and anime, but just like Senran Kagura, Neptunia is a video game series that has a mixture of fan service and storytelling. And like the 5 franchises I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this franchise also has its own animation adaptation. But we'll get to that in part 2. Keep in mind that this will be a multiple part review, so are you interested in getting into Neptunia? Well then, you've come to the right place. In this part, I'll be going through the history of Neptunia, as well as giving you all recommendations on where to start your Neptunia journey. However, this will mostly be spoiler free, so you can experience these games for the first time. And another thing, even though I played the Neptunia games, some of them, I'm not a fan of RPGs. I've never played any Mario RPGs. I've never touched the Final Fantasy series, and don't even try to get me into the Pokemon games or the Kingdom Hearts series. Not even the Mario and Luigi series either. Give me Dragon Ball Z Kakarot and maybe we can talk about it. And I guess 7 Pirates H, an RPG centered on female pirates with big boobs. Sign me up. But when it comes to RPGs, I will play Neptunia. Goki Genyo everyone, the Starlight Let's Player is here, and this is part 1 of the Hyperdimension Neptunia anime review. In 2010, the Neptunia series kicked off with the very first title, Hyperdimension Neptunia, with the game being released worldwide in 2011. Now, what Idea Factory and Compound Heart thought would just be one game turned out to be a major success because of this. So, because of this game, the series continued on, and to this day, it's still going strong. Yeah, over 10 years of Neptunia games. Now, that's impressive. So you might be thinking, what is Neptunia? What is it about? Well, the story centers on 4 goddesses that were born. Unfortunately, a war began over who could rule the world. That war being the console war, which pretty much references which console people think is the best. Eventually, under these goddesses, the world split into 4 different lands. Planetune, the land of purple progress. Lestation, the land of black regality. Louis, the land of white serenity. And Leanbox, the land of green pastures. Each world worships one of the goddesses. However, they would actually become both friends and allies. and with all 4, it's known as game industry. Neptunia also loves to have fourth wall breaking moments and a shit ton of references from video games and other media. Seriously, throughout every single game, you're not gonna escape any of this shit. It's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. So now let's talk about the characters, and let me just say right off the bat, Neptunia is quite the crazy bitch when it comes to bringing in characters old and new. I'm not kidding, there's over 150 characters from all the Neptunia games as well as the anime. Some are based on consoles while some are based on the companies, but I'll mainly talk about the main characters. So right off the bat, we're introduced with the 4 main protagonists. Neptune's the ditzy and funny goddess who's known as Lady Purpleheart and is based off the cancelled Sega Neptune, as well as being the ruler of Planeptune, with Histoire being the oracle of Planeptune. Noir's the tsundere goddess, as she's known as Lady Blackheart and is based off the PlayStation 3 and is the ruler of Lestation. Then there's Blonde, a quiet and inexpressive goddess with one shitty language, and she's known as Lady Whiteheart, and she's based off the Nintendo Wii and is the ruler of Louis. And finally, Bert, the big-breasted goddess who's known as Lady Greenheart and is based off the Xbox 360 and is the ruler of Leanbox. Now each CPU has the ability to transform into their hard drive Definity form, or HDD for short. Some of them can have a personality and appearance change, but nearly each CPU will be wearing leotard-like battle outfits. For example, in her default form, Neptune has the appearance of a preteen young girl despite her being pretty much over 18, in my opinion. But when she transforms into Purpleheart, her hair changes from short to long hair and pigtails. She gets taller, her boobs become bigger, her eyes goes from dark purple to blue. She becomes more mature and serious. And did I mention she's sexy? Noir's hairstyle also changes. It goes from black twin tails to white long hair, and her eyes go from crimson red to a bluish green when she transforms into Blackheart. When Blonde transforms into Whiteheart, her hair becomes light blue as it stands up a bit, increasing the length of her sideburns, and her eyes changes from a darkish purple to a crimson red. And for Vert, whenever she transforms into Greenheart, her hair goes from blonde to green, wrapping it into a ponytail, sporting purple eyes. We're also introduced to the younger sisters of the CPUs, known as the CPU candidates. Nepgear is the younger sister of Neptune and is based off the Sega Game Gear. Uni's the younger sister of Noir and is based off the PlayStation Portable. And finally, Ram and Ram are the younger twin sisters of Blonde. Ram's the older twin, who has short hair, and Ram's the younger twin, who has longer hair. They're based off the twin screens of the Nintendo DS, and just like their sisters, they can also go HDD. Nepgear's hair only changes color when transforming into Purple Sister, so there's really no drastic change aside from that. When Uni transforms into Black Sister, her eyes go from crimson red to green, and black twin tails becoming white curly twin tails. Though the downside to her transformation is that she loses her boobs, going from B cup to A cup. Talk about a drastic downfall if you ask me. Both Ram and Ram are known as White Sister. Ram's hair changes to blue with pink eyes, and Ram's hair changes to pink with blue eyes. And as far as the other main CPUs, Plutia is the ruler of Planeptune from Ultra Dimension. She's a laid-back, lazy, and narcoleptic goddess who's based off the cancelled Sega Pluto and is known as Iris Heart. And her HDD is something. Just like Neptune, Plutia changes drastically. Her body gets taller, her boobs get even bigger, her hair is out of a ponytail and changes from light purple to an indigo color, and her outfit is a bit more revealing. Plus, her personality is sadistic.
You moved me. I went to transform so I could save that ass of yours.
Usume Tanobushi is the ruler of Planeptune from Zero Dimension. She's a tomboyish and straightforward girl who's known as Orange Heart and is based off the Sega Dreamcast. When she transforms, her eyes go from a reddish orange to a light blue. Her hair changes from red to orange, and her personality becomes girly and childish. And as for human characters, IF or Iffy is based on the publisher of Neptunia, Idea Factory, and Compa is a nurse in training and is based off the developer of Neptunia, Compile Heart. And finally, despite only being in one game, we have Hatsumi Sega, aka Segami, and she's based off of the third-party company, Sega, who pretty much actually helped out with the first game, by the way. You may also recognize some of the references that the characters wear. But now let's get on to the games. We have the main titles, we have the remakes, and we have the spin-offs. So let's get started with the main games first. The Neptunia series as of now has only 4 main games. The first, of course, is Hyperdimension Neptunia, which I already covered. The second game is Hyperdimension Neptunia Mark II, released in 2011 in Japan and in 2012 worldwide. This one centers on the CPU candidates. Then in 2012 was the third game, Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory, and it was released in worldwide in 2013. Victory centers on the Nep sisters and the Ultra Dimension CPUs. Ugh. And in 2015 came Mega Dimension Neptunia Victory 2, or V2 for short. V2 centers on the Nep sisters once again, as well as the new character Uzume. So let's talk about the first game, Hyperdimension Neptunia first. Now I will say for the first game, I think it's pretty good. I've watched the entire story on YouTube before even tackling this game, and I think it's a cool story. If Neptune was like this in future games, I love her even more. She's still my favorite alongside Uzume, but the Rebirth series really fucked up her character. Though it would have been better had they planned out the true ending. As for gameplay wise, it's pretty decent. I don't like the random encounters with the enemies the game gives, and the characters do move like tanks when running through dungeons, but the battle system isn't bad like many Neptubers claim it to be. At least it gives you a big amount of attack points to use when you level up, and you can pull off good combos too. Let me point out 2 things that people seem to gloss over. Firstly, the game does have a difficulty setting, so you can choose which difficulty you want the game to be. And that's actually pretty good. This is something that I think many other Neptune games needs to have. It is an awesome way to make your journey a far better experience. So yeah, you can choose which difficulty you want. And secondly, when you die, you'll have the option to restart the battle. So really, this game does have advantages over the Neptunia turn-based games. Also, to further add to it, you can also save while in the middle of a dungeon, so you don't have to worry about waiting until you actually complete the dungeon in order to save. So that's also another good thing for the first game. Overall, it's a pretty fun game to play. It's not really that great, but it's pretty decent, and it's one that I would spoilers is one of the recommendations I would probably give you. The next game is Hyperdimension Neptunia Mark II. Story wise, it's pretty good. I think Nepgear was at her best in this game, and this is where Uni also makes her debut. She's pretty badass and is easily my favorite CPU candidate. But damn do I hate how bratty Ram and Ram were in this game. But still, it's a fun story to go through, although you might need some tissues when you get to that conquest ending. Seriously, I watched it for the first time and let's just say that I was pretty mortified, pretty terrified, but I'm actually glad that the conquest ending was a thing. It pretty much gives us an aspect of what would happen if Nepgear actually make the wrong choice. Also, I do like how the cutscenes stand out. Instead of using character portraits with mouth and body movements like the last game, they decided to use the in-game models for the cutscenes, specifically the 3D models whenever you're doing the gameplay. And I actually like it. And speaking of gameplay, moving around in dungeons feels more fluid. You're also able to see the enemies in the dungeon instead of having random encounters with them. So with these tweaks, they've really stepped up their game. Though I do wish the camera was a bit better. That's my personal opinion on that, but yeah. And the battle system has changed a bit. This time you'll have a grid in front of your character, and performing combos feels much faster. Not that I have any problem with Neptunia 1's combo system though. And to further add to it, you can now switch between characters in mid-battle. So if one of your characters is at low health, you can switch to another character to continue to fight. You do have to make sure they're at high level though. They also added a new system called the Lily rank. The more you interact with everyone as Nepgear, the higher the Lily rank between characters gets. This is required to get the true ending, by the way, as well as increasing your shares for all nations. Also, speaking of endings, there's probably like 8 of the endings. So we have the normal ending, we have the true ending, we have the conquest ending, and there's also 5 extra endings depending on which nation has the most shares. Also, there's also the 8th one, pretty much the human ending, where basically you have to rank up the lily rank for all of the human characters except for the DLC ones, which is Falcon and Cave, by the way. So yeah, overall Mark II is a step up from its predecessor. It has improvements and has a pretty good soundtrack, plus the story is pretty good. The next game is Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory, and I think I want to get some negatives out of the way first. The story is underwhelming. Some of the characters aren't all that great. I honestly wish they could have done more work on Nepgear's character. They really made her into this whiny character. They really made her into this whiny girl that I can't really describe much, but man, I did not like Nepgear that all in this game that much. And the Ultra Dimension CPUs pretty much pissed me off. They're way worse than the Hyperdimension counterparts, which is why I ranked them extremely low in my tier list. Something that I pretty much need to update. But yeah, and I would say Neptune was pretty decent, but surprisingly, the 7 Sages were much more entertaining in my opinion, and they're the main antagonists of the game. Well, not technically the main antagonist, except one of them is pretty much the main antagonist, but you catch my drift. Thankfully, the gameplay becomes the saving grace of victory. Running through dungeons is still good as Mark II, but the camera feels far better than Mark II's camera, by the way. And the battle system has changed once again. Instead of using attack points to create chains of attacks, doing combos all depends on what weapon you now use. It can go from 3 to 5 attack combos, which pretty much feels limited, but isn't much of a big deal. I do like the first and second game's battle system a bit more. Well, not technically the battle system, but the combos. The Lily Ranks returns once again, but this time they've added a new feature to the game, Nep Station. It's a television program where the characters announces the next chapter of the story, as well as asking the players questions to earn prizes. I actually like this, and I'm glad they've kept this for V2. Hyperdimension Neptunia Victory is a pretty good game. The story may be lacking, but the gameplay and the music makes up for it. That leads us to Mega Dimension Neptunia V2. This game not only has 3 storylines, but they've upgraded the character portraits, making them look a lot better than how Victory made them. And the story itself is just so lovely to watch or play through. Every character has some good expressions and good one-liners. The Nep sisters are at their best in this game, and even the new characters are amazing. Uzume is easily the best character alongside Neptune, like I said before, and the Gold Third are pretty great too. My favorite of the 4 is Sisha. She's got amazing fists, loves the food, has a very sexy body, and even makes a good babysitter for Ram and Ram. This is how you write a big-breasted hero, people. The gameplay from Victory carries over to V2, but it feels way smoother. The environments of dungeons look so beautiful, and overall, this is a sexy looking game. The battle system is the same, but they've added an EX meter. So the more attacks you perform, the more it fills up, and you can use it to perform more powerful attacks. And perhaps the best change is that you can actually use it to transform. Thank you. We have seriously come a long way when it comes to its fan service. They don't hold back on the transformation sequences and level up animations. From the jiggle physics, to Purple Sister tapping her booty, to Greenheart even showing off her booty a bit. Even the cutscenes itself has some fan service as well. But at the same time, it doesn't overdo it on an aspect, which I'm thankful for. I love a good balance between story and edgy moments.
Freeze, bitch!
Lily ranks are optional now, which means you don't need them for the true ending campaign. Thank you. But I will say getting the true ending is very easy on your first run if you know what you're doing. Seriously, just look up a guide, do some grinding, and you'll be sure to get the true ending on your first try. With all that said, Mega Dimension Neptunia V2 is easily the best main title ever made. It has amazing graphics, a wonderful story, a sizable amount of characters to play as, the gameplay is wonderful, and the soundtrack is pretty good to listen to.
Max, which do you like? An assault rifle, a Gatling gun, or an anti-tank rifle? Because I'll take your favorite gun and shoot you right in that thick head of yours!
I'll give my overall thoughts on all 4 of these games whenever I do review on them. But for now, let's get on to the remakes and the spin-offs. There are remakes of the main games known as the Rebirth series, with the remake of V2 being V2R, taking advantage of the PlayStation VR. Oh, but that's not all. They've also bothered to make a remake of Rebirth 1 called Neptunia Reverse. And if you saw my second video on Neptunia's 10th anniversary, you'll know just how disappointing that became. I'm not even going to waste my time on any of these remakes. Mainly, I don't even own any of these remakes, and I don't think I ever want to get them. I've seen the stories on these remakes, and man, the first one is pretty bad. So, let's just move on. Let's just move on from that one. Now let's talk about the spin-offs. There are 14 spin-offs in this franchise, and besides Nepgear having her own title, there are 4 other games that don't focus on Neptune. So let's focus on them for a bit. First up, we have Noir, who is the second character to have her own game titled Hyperdimension Noir Goddess Black Heart, which was released in 2014 on the PlayStation Vita. It's where Noir must team up with the other CPUs to find and recruit the 18 generals of their cities to restore the Shera site and defeat R4 once and for all. 3 of my favorite generals are Li-Fi, a Chun-Li based hottie who's good with the hands and the legs. We have Moru, a Monster Hunter based Neko, and we have Puna, an adorable girl who's based off of Opuna, a game that I haven't even heard of. But you wanna know what's the coolest thing? We have a general in this game. Her name is Estelle, and her voice actress is Janice Kawaye, the same woman who voiced Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot, and Ami from Hi Hi Puffy Ami Yumi, a cartoon that centers on the 2 main characters that's based on an actual Japanese duo, Puffy Ami Yumi. Wait, what? Hold up. Wait, she's Japanese too? What the fuck? Then in 2015, Blonde and Ify got their own titles. One of them was Mega Tag Mention Blonde and Neptune vs. Zombies, where it centers on Blonde and the others being schoolgirls and are trying to make a horror film to save their school. We see the return of Uzume, Plutia, and Pishi, and we're introduced to a new character named Samsoft. There's also a new game coming this year called Top Nep, which centers on the older Neptune fighting through waves of enemies. I don't have that much info seeing that this game hasn't came out yet, but it will be coming out in 2022 this year. And finally, the last game is a crossover game with another series called Sega Hard Girls, which is one funny and cute anime if you ask me. It centers on Ify saving and teaming up with Hatsumi Sega, or Segami for short. They were sent on a mission by the smaller Istwar to restore the past and to change history between the goddesses and the Sega Hard Girls. Both titles were also released on the PlayStation Vita, but that wasn't the only crossover that happened. When Senran Kagura Peach Beach Splash came out, not only was Supersonico a DLC character, but they also added Neptune as a DLC character as well. Now, how awesome is that? I've already covered her in my Peach Bleach Splash playthrough, so check it out whenever you can. And fun fact, Mega Tag mentioned along with Action Unleashed U and Cyberdimension Neptunia 4 Goddesses Online, they were all developed by Tamsoft, the same company that worked on the Senran Kagura games. They've also collaborated once again, this time with their own game, Neptunia across Senran Kagura Ninja Wars. So with the inclusion of Super Neptunia RPG, Neptunia Virtual Stars, Senran Kagura X Neptunia, and the upcoming Neptunia game, Hyperdimension Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters, that's a total of 23 Neptunia games. And I know someone's gonna mention the Neptunia apps, but I don't own any of these apps, so I can't show them off, unfortunately. But yeah, that is all the Neptunia video games so far. My god, try saying Neptunia so many times. Now, if I'm gonna comment on the music, I actually like it. Though the ending themes of 1, Mark II, Victory, and V2 are the best vocal songs I've ever listened to in a video game. Living shoutouts to Ophelia Saga and INA, they've really done their work on these songs. I can also say the same for 4Go's opening theme. However, the in-game music is way too repetitive. Not for the first game, but after Mark II, they started reusing some of the same music tracks for almost every Neptunia game, with the exception of Cyberdimension Neptunia and maybe Hyperdimension Noir. Now they do bring in some new music pieces like the Seven Sages theme, and there are a lot of new tracks in Mega Dimension V2, and the tracks in Mega Dimension Blonde and Hyperdimension Neptunia U are okay. And I will admit, even some of the newer games have their own different soundtracks, but when it comes to the other games, I think it could have been better had they actually do have their own entire soundtracks. I mean, come on, even Sonic the Hedgehog has their own different soundtracks, despite them having a few remixes now and then, but eventually they still have their own original soundtracks. So yeah, I think they could have done a bit better when trying to actually plan out the actual music pieces on some of these older games. However, I believe that Hyperdimension Neptunia and Cyberdimension Neptunia has the best OST in the whole entire series. There was never a moment where I felt a bit of distaste when listening to these soundtracks. I can never get enough of the battle themes in Hyperdimension Neptunia, and the music themes in the dungeon are awesome to hear. They give this type of Egyptian vibe, and it really suits the game overall. And the energetic tracks in Cyberdimension Neptunia are way too good. I also like the music during the cutscenes for both games as well. They have always been something I can listen to, besides my favorite Sonic tracks. So you're probably asking the question, where should I start on Neptunia? Well, I have 5 recommendations for you. The first is the original game, Hyperdimension Neptunia. Contrary to what others may think, I say the gameplay is very solid. It's not the best and not very polished, but it's still pretty good. I like the battle system in the game. The only issue I have with the game is the random encounters you get in the dungeons. Other than that, it's pretty decent. I say start with the first game. I'm sure you have your PS3 on standby, so give it some love, and despite the retconning ending, you might find some enjoyment from the gameplay and a lovely story. And as I said before, unlike all the other Neptunia games, this one lets you choose the difficulty of the game, and you can restart the battle if all your characters are down. So really, there's no excuse for you not to start with the first game. And this may be bold to say, but not recommending anyone with HD1 is extremely criminal to me. So yeah, start with Hyperdimension Neptunia, or you could go with Rebirth 1, the remake of Hyperdimension Neptunia. In my opinion, 95% of the story is way better than its remake story as a whole. Rebirth 1, from a story standpoint, is an awful story. They could have easily done the same story while changing the ending to make it better. Plus, it overall is not entertaining. I mean, you can make the argument that the original games aren't canon anymore due to the falling out between NISA and IF, but Rebirth 2 and 3 are the exact same storylines as Mark 2 and Victory with only a few changes. So I wouldn't really call those two non-canon in my opinion. Even if they were non-canon, that doesn't mean they should be marked off. That also goes for the first game as well. But that's just me though. Still, if you want, you can start with Rebirth 1. It's on the PlayStation Vita and Steam. It's also on the PlayStation 4 for Japanese players. However, if you want the best gameplay and the best story, start with Mega Dimension Neptunia V2. If you want a good depth on the gameplay and story, you can check out my V2 Let's Play in the top right corner. It's on the PlayStation 2, Steam, and was recently released on a Nintendo Switch. But I'd recommend the PS4 version or Steam. Those have a good 60 frames per second while the Switch version only runs at 30 frames. Hell, I'd also recommend Cyberdimension Neptunia for Goddesses Online. I love the gameplay a lot. It's an MMORPG with new dungeons, fun gameplay mechanics, a smooth 60 frames per second, and a rocking soundtrack. But if you aren't into those games just yet, you can start off with the anime adaptation that came out in July of 2013, that being Hyperdimension Neptunia, the animation. Is the show as good as the games? You'll have to find out next time. But I will say this, no matter which one you start off with, as long as you have a fun time from start to finish, that's all that matters. Hope you all enjoyed this video, and hopefully you'll have a fun time starting out your Neptunia adventure. So stay tuned for part 2 as we finally head into Hyperdimension Neptunia, the animation. But before we get to that, we gotta get through part 2 of the Happiness Charge Pedicure review. Until then, this is the Starlight Let's Player signing out. As always, Goki Genyo, and have a startastic day, everyone.
I
knew I would fulfill my dream, yeah. They knew I started from the bottom, now I made it, yeah. The possibilities are endless, yeah, I say, yeah. I got the roots and I got everything I need, yeah. And now I'm chilling with a pretty gentle lady, yeah. She got a kinda gentle personality, yeah. She got them curvy hips and a booty for booty.